the failure never begins with fire or flood. It begins quietly, in the moment a system you trusted stops working and you don't yet understand the consequences. The lights flicker once, then die. Water pressure fades into a hollow cough of air. Refrigeration warms by a single degree that no one notices. In those first minutes, survival is not determined by strength, speed, or modern tools. It is determined by memory, specifically, by knowledge that once lived in ordinary households, passed through repetition, embedded in routine, and then gradually abandoned as convenience replaced necessity. What was once considered basic competence has become obscure, and in a grid-down scenario, that loss becomes immediately measurable in risk. The first danger is dehydration, but not in the way most people imagine it. The common assumption is that thirst signals the problem early enough to act, but this is a physiological misunderstanding. Thirst lags behind actual fluid deficit, especially under stress, heat, or increased respiration. By the time a person feels genuinely thirsty, plasma osmolality has already shifted, blood volume has begun to decline, and cognitive performance is measurably impaired. Your grandmother would not have waited for thirst. She would have stored water in advance, rotated it, and understood the fragility of supply systems long before modern infrastructure masked that vulnerability. Today's systems rely on electrically powered pumping, chemical treatment, and continuous pressure. Remove any one of those elements, and contamination becomes not a possibility, but a statistical certainty. The overlooked principle here is microbial growth kinetics. Water that sits stagnant in pipes or containers becomes a medium for bacteria, protozoa, and algae, especially in warm environments. Municipal treatment relies heavily on chlorine residuals, which dissipate over time. Without constant replenishment, that protection fades. Evidence from disaster zones repeatedly shows that gastrointestinal illness spikes within 48 to 72 hours after water systems fail. Cholera, E. coli, and other pathogens exploit exactly this window. The survival implication is immediate. Safe water is not just about access, but about treatment and storage. Boiling, filtration, and chemical disinfection are not optional techniques, they are layered defenses. Your grandmother boiled water not out of superstition, but because heat denatures proteins and disrupts microbial cell membranes with predictable efficiency. The escalation occurs when dehydration intersects with decision-making. A mildly dehydrated brain makes poorer risk assessments, leading to compounding errors, choosing unsafe water sources, misjudging physical limits, or delaying necessary actions. This is how small failures cascade into critical situations. The transition from inconvenience to crisis is rarely dramatic, it is incremental, driven by the erosion of physiological stability. Then comes the second failure, less visible but equally lethal: loss of food preservation. Modern refrigeration has created an illusion that food safety is a static condition rather than a dynamic process. When power fails, the clock starts immediately. Bacterial growth follows an exponential curve, not a linear one. The temperature danger zone, between roughly 5 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius, allows pathogens like Salmonella and Listeria to multiply rapidly. Most people assume they have more time than they do, but in reality, perishable food can become unsafe within hours, not days. Your grandmother operated under a completely different model. Preservation was not dependent on electricity but on controlling moisture, acidity, and microbial access. Drying reduces water activity to levels where bacteria cannot replicate. Fermentation introduces beneficial microbes that outcompete harmful ones while producing acids that inhibit growth. Salting creates osmotic conditions that dehydrate microbial cells. These are not primitive techniques, they are biochemical strategies rooted in an understanding, often intuitive, but no less valid, of microbial ecology. The misunderstanding today is that these methods are outdated rather than foundational. Evidence from food science confirms their effectiveness across cultures and centuries. Properly fermented foods can remain stable for months. Dried grains, if kept dry, can last for years. The survival implication is profound. Without refrigeration, the ability to stabilize food determines whether stored calories remain assets or become liabilities. Spoiled food is not just wasted, it is dangerous, capable of introducing toxins that further weaken the body. As the situation escalates, caloric intake becomes irregular, and the body shifts into conservation mode. Glycogen stores deplete, metabolism adjusts, and physical endurance declines. This is where the third overlooked skill emerges: rationing. Not starvation, not hoarding, but controlled distribution based on metabolic need and expected duration of scarcity. Your grandmother did not measure calories with digital precision, but she understood seasonal scarcity, portion control, and the importance of stretching resources. Modern habits, shaped by abundance, often ignore these constraints until it is too late. The hidden science lies in energy balance and metabolic adaptation. The human body can survive extended periods with reduced caloric intake, but only if hydration and micronutrients are maintained. Sudden overexertion in a calorie deficit accelerates muscle breakdown and impairs immune function. Evidence from survival studies and historical famines shows that those who managed intake strategically had higher survival rates than those who consumed resources rapidly without planning. The implication is not simply to eat less, but to eat intelligently, prioritizing nutrient density, timing intake to match activity, and avoiding metabolic spikes that waste energy. The escalation here is subtle. Fatigue leads to slower reactions, weaker judgment, and increased vulnerability to environmental hazards. Again, the danger compounds rather than explodes. And then the environment itself begins to assert control. Temperature, often ignored in stable living conditions, becomes a dominant threat. Hypothermia can occur in temperatures well above freezing, especially when combined with wind or moisture. Hyperthermia can develop rapidly in hot climates without adequate hydration and shade. The common misunderstanding is that survival depends on extreme conditions, but in reality, it is moderate conditions sustained over time that cause the most harm. Your grandmother's knowledge of clothing, layering, and shelter was not aesthetic, it was thermodynamic. Insulation works by trapping air, reducing heat transfer. Layering allows for adjustment as conditions change, maintaining a stable microclimate around the body. Ventilation prevents moisture buildup, which would otherwise increase heat loss through conduction and evaporation. These principles are supported by physics, not tradition. Evidence from search and rescue operations consistently shows that exposure is a leading cause of death in survival scenarios, often more than injury or starvation. The implication is clear: managing body temperature is a continuous process, requiring attention to environment, activity level, and available materials. The escalation occurs when the body's core temperature drifts outside its narrow optimal range, impairing enzyme function, cognitive ability, and ultimately, organ systems. What appears, at first, as a collection of simple, almost old-fashioned habits reveals itself as an integrated system of survival logic. Each skill addresses a specific vulnerability, but together they form a resilient framework. The loss of these skills is not immediately visible in daily life, but under stress, their absence becomes catastrophic. And this is only the beginning, because as systems continue to fail, new layers of risk emerge: sanitation, fire control, navigation, and the psychology of isolation, all governed by the same principle: what was once common knowledge now determines who adapts and who does not.